Do as I say or quit. The CEO issued the challenge, but the single father simply started packing his things and walked out, leaving everyone stunned. What could possibly lead to such a dramatic moment? Why would someone choose to walk away instead of staying? Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're here to join us for another unforgettable story. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest storytelling videos. Thank you for your continued support. It truly means a lot and helps us bring you more compelling stories. Now, tell us in the comments, if you were given the same challenge, what would you do? With that question in mind, let's step into today's story and discover how everything begins. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. Sometimes, the strongest person is the one who quietly walks away. Those words would echo through Sterling Dynamics long after the boardroom doors had closed, because no one inside that glass tower would ever forget the morning when a single father chose his dignity over his career. Monday began like every other day in downtown Seattle. Rain had washed the streets before sunrise, leaving the sidewalks glistening beneath the first rays of pale autumn light. Employees hurried through the revolving doors carrying coffee cups, laptop bags, and unfinished conversations, unaware that the company was about to witness a moment that would quietly change everything. Daniel Brooks stepped out of the elevator on the 27th floor with the same calm expression he wore every morning. At 42 years old, he had spent nearly a decade at Sterling Dynamics. He was never the loudest voice during meetings, never the employee fighting for recognition, and never the first person executives noticed. Yet coworkers often found themselves asking Daniel for help before asking anyone else. He answered questions without making people feel small. He solved problems without expecting applause. He listened more than he spoke. That morning, however, something in the air felt different. The executive conference room filled quickly. Department managers lined both sides of the polished walnut table while presentation screens illuminated charts, financial forecasts, and project deadlines. At precisely 9 o'clock, Victoria Hayes entered the room. As Chief Executive Officer, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. Her tailored navy suit, composed posture, and steady voice commanded immediate attention. She placed a folder on the table and looked around the room before speaking. We have reached a point where excuses are no longer acceptable. From today forward, everyone follows the new operational system exactly as instructed. Several managers exchanged uneasy glances. The proposed system had already raised concerns about unrealistic timelines and excessive workloads, but no one interrupted. Victoria continued without hesitation. If anyone believes they cannot support this direction, then there is a simple alternative. She paused just long enough for complete silence to settle over the room. Do as I say or quit. No one moved. No one cleared a throat. Even the steady hum of the building's ventilation seemed louder than before. Daniel quietly lowered his eyes toward the folder resting in front of him. He did not argue. He did not challenge the decision. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he slowly closed his notebook, placed his pen inside the spiral binding, and slipped both into his worn leather messenger bag. Several coworkers watched him with growing confusion. One manager leaned forward, expecting Daniel to speak on behalf of the entire department. Another silently hoped he would negotiate. Victoria remained standing, convinced the silence meant compliance. Daniel reached into his desk drawer beside the conference table and removed a framed photograph. It showed his 12-year-old daughter smiling proudly beside the science fair project they had spent weeks building together in their small garage. He brushed an invisible speck of dust from the glass before placing the photograph carefully inside his bag. Next came a ceramic coffee mug decorated with fading blue paint and the handwritten words, "Best Dad Ever." His daughter had made it in elementary school years earlier. Finally, he unclipped his employee identification badge and placed it gently on the conference table. Every movement was unhurried. Every gesture carried quiet certainty. The room remained frozen. One by one, conversations disappeared into complete silence. Daniel looked toward Victoria with calm, respectful eyes. I hope the company succeeds, he said softly. I truly do. There was no bitterness in his voice. No accusation. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Only sincerity. Then he nodded politely to the people he had worked beside for years, lifted his messenger bag onto his shoulder, and walked toward the conference room door. No one asked him to stay. No one knew what to say. The sound of the door closing behind him was remarkably gentle, yet somehow it echoed louder than any speech ever delivered inside that room. Standing alone before the board, Victoria believed she had demonstrated strength. She did not yet realize that the strongest person had just quietly walked away, carrying nothing more than a photograph, a coffee mug, and a dignity that no company could ever take from him. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby with the same quiet sound they had made thousands of times before, but for Daniel Brooks, everything beyond those glass doors now belonged to a different chapter of his life. He stepped outside carrying only his worn leather messenger bag, the framed photograph of his daughter safely tucked inside, and the handmade coffee mug wrapped carefully in an old sweater to keep it from breaking. Rain clouds drifted slowly across the Seattle skyline, leaving the air cool and fresh as commuters hurried past without realizing that one man had just walked away from the career he had spent nearly 10 years building. Daniel did not stop to look back at the towering office building. He drove home through familiar neighborhood streets lined with maple trees whose leaves had begun turning shades of amber and crimson. His modest two-bedroom house stood quietly at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac where children still rode bicycles after school and neighbors greeted one another by name. Before unlocking the front door, Daniel took a slow breath, not because he regretted his decision, but because he knew another conversation mattered far more than the one he had left behind. A few hours later, the front door opened again as 12-year-old Emma Brooks hurried inside wearing her backpack and carrying a stack of science worksheets beneath one arm. "Dad, guess what?" she asked excitedly before noticing he was already standing in the kitchen preparing grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. "Mrs. Carter said my bridge design held the most weight in class today." Daniel smiled warmly. "I knew it would. You kept improving it every evening instead of giving up after the first attempt." Emma laughed as she placed her backpack beside the dining table. "That is because you kept telling me strong things are built one small piece at a time." Daniel nodded while pouring soup into 2 bowls. "The same lesson works outside of science projects." They sat together at the small wooden table where countless dinners, homework sessions, and conversations had quietly shaped their lives since Emma's mother had passed away years earlier. Family photographs lined a nearby shelf, each one capturing ordinary moments instead of expensive vacations or grand celebrations. To Daniel, those pictures represented success far better than any office overlooking downtown Seattle. Emma noticed his employee badge resting beside the coffee mug on the kitchen counter. She looked at it for a moment before raising her eyes. "You are home early." Daniel met her curious expression with complete honesty. "I am." She hesitated gently. "Did something happen?" Daniel took another slow breath before answering. "I decided today that keeping my self-respect was more important than keeping my job." Emma remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. "Sometimes life asks us to choose between doing what is easy and doing what is right. Those two things are not always the same." She studied his face carefully, searching for signs of anger or disappointment. Instead, she found only the same peaceful expression that had comforted her through every difficult season of their lives. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked softly. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We have been through harder days than this." His voice remained steady. "As long as we have each other, we will find another way forward." Emma smiled with complete trust because every promise her father had ever made had been kept. After dinner, they washed the dishes together, finished homework at the kitchen table, and spent an hour repairing the small birdhouse they had started building the previous weekend. Nothing about the evening felt dramatic. There were no speeches about courage and no complaints about unfairness. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees while warm light continued glowing through the windows of their small home. At that same hour, dozens of people inside Sterling Dynamics were still discussing the man who had quietly walked away without raising his voice. None of them knew that the greatest strength they had witnessed that morning was not found in leaving the company. It was found in coming home with enough peace to sit beside his daughter and make an ordinary evening feel completely secure. The following morning, Sterling Dynamics looked exactly the same from the outside, but inside the 27-story building, something invisible had already begun to shift. Employees arrived carrying fresh coffee, greeting one another with familiar smiles, expecting another ordinary Tuesday. Instead, they stepped into an atmosphere that felt strangely unsettled. Daniel Brooks had never been the center of attention while he worked there, yet his empty desk seemed to attract more attention than any executive office on the floor. His chair remained neatly pushed beneath the desk. His computer had already been collected by the information technology department. Only the faint outline where his family photograph had rested for years remained visible on the polished wooden surface. Several co-workers slowed as they walked past, exchanging uncertain glances before quietly returning to their assignments. By mid-morning, the first unexpected problem appeared. A long-term client requested an update on a complex project, but no one could explain why certain milestones had been scheduled in a particular order. 3 department managers searched through reports, spreadsheets, and email threads, yet none of the documents fully answered the client's questions. Someone finally whispered, "Daniel always handled this part." Another employee replied, "I thought someone else was doing it." The room fell silent. An hour later, another issue surfaced. A newly hired analyst struggled to complete a presentation because the internal training documents were incomplete. She looked around for help before remembering that Daniel had personally mentored nearly every new employee during their first months at the company. He had never mentioned it during performance reviews. He had never listed those hours on his accomplishments. He had simply believed that helping people succeed was part of doing the job well. Throughout the afternoon, similar moments continued unfolding across the building. A vendor called asking specifically for Daniel because he was the only person who consistently returned calls before the end of each business day. A maintenance supervisor needed clarification about equipment upgrades that Daniel had quietly coordinated between departments months earlier. The finance team discovered handwritten notes attached to old budget reports explaining small adjustments that had prevented expensive mistakes. None of those notes carried dramatic language. They simply reflected someone who believed every detail mattered because every person affected by those details mattered. Victoria Hayes watched each report arrive at her office with growing concern. She had expected temporary inconvenience after losing an experienced employee, but she had not expected the company to feel as though invisible threads were slowly unraveling. During an afternoon leadership meeting, department heads offered conflicting explanations for delayed tasks. One blamed communication problems. Another pointed toward changing priorities. A third admitted quietly, "The truth is that Daniel connected people before problems became emergencies. Most of us never noticed because he solved things before anyone else realized they existed." Victoria listened without interrupting. She remembered the calm expression on Daniel's face as he had picked up his daughter's photograph before leaving the conference room. At the time, she had interpreted his silence as quiet surrender. Now she wondered whether she had misunderstood something much deeper. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel spent the day updating his resume after dropping Emma off at school. He completed each application carefully before taking a break to help his elderly neighbor carry grocery bags from her car to her front porch. When she thanked him, he simply smiled and wished her a pleasant afternoon. He did not mention losing his job. He did not seek sympathy. Later, he volunteered to repair the loose gate separating their backyards because he had noticed it swinging open whenever the wind picked up. By evening, Emma returned home to find her father preparing homemade spaghetti while soft jazz music played from an old kitchen radio. She asked whether anyone had called about work. Daniel smiled gently. "Not yet." She nodded without worry because she trusted him completely. As they sat together for dinner, neither of them realized that inside Sterling Dynamics, more and more people were beginning to understand a simple truth. Some people carry impressive titles that everyone can see. Others quietly carry an entire community without asking anyone to notice until the day they are gone. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies over Seattle, but inside Sterling Dynamics the atmosphere remained unusually heavy. Meetings started on time, presentations filled the conference rooms, and computer screens displayed endless reports. Yet every department seemed to move just a little slower than before. Small problems that once disappeared quietly now lingered throughout the day, growing larger with every passing hour. Victoria Hayes sat alone in her office overlooking the city skyline, reading another summary describing missed deadlines, delayed approvals, and confused communication between teams that had always worked together smoothly. None of the reports mentioned Daniel Brooks directly, yet somehow every problem seemed to point back to the absence of the quiet man who had carried his messenger bag out of the building only days earlier. She leaned back in her chair and pressed the intercom. "Please ask Human Resources to bring me Daniel Brooks's complete personnel file." 20 minutes later, a thick folder rested on her desk. Victoria expected an ordinary employment history, perhaps a few strong performance reviews and routine evaluations. Instead, she found something entirely different. Every annual review praised Daniel's technical knowledge, but what caught her attention were the handwritten comments left by different supervisors over the years. One manager had written, "Always volunteers before being asked." Another noted, "Frequently helps departments outside his responsibilities." A third comment simply read, "Keeps everyone calm during difficult projects." None of those observations had ever resulted in promotions or public recognition. Daniel had accepted every assignment with the same quiet professionalism and then moved on to the next challenge. Victoria continued turning pages. There were records showing that Daniel had declined leadership bonuses twice because he believed the budget should be used for employee training instead. Another document revealed that he had personally organized weekend workshops for new hires without requesting overtime pay. She frowned, realizing she had never heard about any of it. Curious, she opened archived email records connected to major company projects. Again and again, she found messages from frustrated clients that ended very differently than they had begun. Initial complaints transformed into appreciation after Daniel patiently explained solutions, often taking responsibility for problems that had not even been his fault. One customer wrote, "Thank you for treating us with respect when everyone else rushed the conversation." Another message read, "Daniel restored our confidence in this company." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. Those clients had remained loyal for years, and she had always credited the company's business strategy. Now she wondered how much of that loyalty had actually been earned by one employee whose name rarely appeared in executive presentations. Later that afternoon, she invited several department managers into her office. "Tell me honestly," she said, "what kind of employee was Daniel Brooks?" The room remained quiet until Senior Project Manager Michael Turner spoke first. "He made everyone else's job easier." Another manager nodded. Whenever two departments disagreed, Daniel somehow found common ground before conflicts grew. A young analyst added, "He was the first person who welcomed me on my first day. I thought he was part of Human Resources because he spent nearly an hour helping me settle in." Soft laughter filled the room before fading into thoughtful silence. Victoria listened carefully as story after story unfolded. Daniel had covered shifts for coworkers with sick family members. He remembered birthdays without making a show of it. He stayed late to help people finish presentations even when his own work had already been completed. None of those actions appeared in quarterly reports or executive summaries. They existed only in the memories of people whose lives had become a little easier because of his quiet kindness. As the meeting ended, Victoria remained alone, staring once again at Daniel's personnel file. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she questioned whether she had measured success using the wrong standards. Numbers revealed profits. Charts measured growth. Performance metrics tracked productivity. Yet none of those reports had ever measured patience, integrity, or the steady influence of someone who quietly lifted everyone around him. Across town, Daniel finished helping Emma prepare for her upcoming science presentation before they shared hot chocolate on the front porch as the evening air turned cool. He smiled as she practiced her speech with growing confidence. completely unaware that the company he had left behind had finally begun discovering the value of the man they had never truly seen. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine and crisp autumn air, offering Seattle one of those rare weekends when the sky seemed endless and every neighborhood park filled with families before noon. Daniel Brooks had promised Emma they would spend the morning together after she finished rehearsing her science presentation one last time. They stopped first at a small neighborhood bakery where the owner greeted them by name and slipped an extra cinnamon roll into their paper bag with a smile. Daniel thanked him warmly, but insisted on paying for it anyway. "Kindness deserves respect," he said quietly. "Not assumptions." Emma smiled because she had heard her father say similar things for years. Across town, Victoria Hayes drove alone without a destination that made complete sense even to herself. She had planned to spend the weekend reviewing financial projections, but the personnel file sitting on her kitchen table had refused to leave her thoughts. Every page seemed to describe a man she had never truly known despite working in the same company for years. Instead of returning to the office, she found herself driving through neighborhoods she had rarely visited, wondering how someone with Daniel's reputation outside the executive offices could have remained nearly invisible to senior leadership. She stopped at a neighborhood hardware store to purchase supplies for a loose cabinet hinge in her condominium. As she walked toward the parking lot carrying a small paper bag, she noticed an elderly man struggling to load several heavy flower pots into the back of his pickup truck. Before Victoria could decide whether to help, another familiar figure had already stepped forward. Daniel set down the bag he was carrying, smiled warmly, and said, "Let us make this easier together." Within minutes, he had carefully secured every flower pot with spare rope from his own vehicle, making certain nothing would shift during the drive home. The older man thanked him repeatedly. Daniel simply wished him a pleasant weekend and continued walking away without expecting another word. Victoria remained standing several yards away, watching quietly. Daniel had not noticed her. A few moments later, she followed at a respectful distance as he crossed the street toward a neighborhood park. Emma ran ahead laughing when she spotted several classmates gathering near the playground. Daniel greeted every parent with the same calm friendliness he had shown everyone else that morning. He adjusted a loose bicycle chain for one child, helped another family unfold a picnic table, and patiently explained a simple math shortcut to a young boy frustrated with his homework packet. None of those people treated him like someone who had recently lost his job. They greeted him like someone they trusted completely. Victoria sat alone on a nearby bench, almost hidden beneath a large maple tree. She watched Daniel encourage Emma as she confidently explained her science project to curious friends. Whenever another child asked a question, Daniel stepped back instead of answering himself, allowing his daughter to discover her own confidence. Pride filled his eyes, but it was quiet pride, the kind that celebrated another person's growth rather than drawing attention to itself. As the afternoon sunlight filtered gently through the colorful leaves, Victoria realized she was witnessing something no executive report could ever measure. Daniel led people without authority. He earned respect without demanding it. He influenced children, neighbors, strangers, and coworkers through ordinary moments that most people overlooked. She remembered the boardroom where she had spoken about discipline and compliance. Sitting on that park bench, she suddenly understood that genuine leadership could not be ordered. It had to be lived every single day. Daniel finally noticed her as Emma waved politely toward the unfamiliar visitor. Their eyes met across the park. Surprise crossed Daniel's face for only a moment before it disappeared behind the same composed expression he had carried out of Sterling Dynamics days earlier. He offered a small, respectful nod, neither inviting nor rejecting conversation, simply acknowledging another human being with quiet grace. For the first time in many years, Victoria Hayes felt that the most important lesson of her career was about to begin, and she was no longer certain she would be the one teaching it. Sunday afternoon settled gently over the neighborhood as a cool breeze carried the scent of pine and freshly cut grass through the quiet streets. Daniel Brooks had just finished helping Emma organize her school supplies for the coming week when the doorbell rang. He opened the door expecting a neighbor, but instead found Victoria Hayes standing on the front porch with a calm expression that was noticeably different from the one she had worn in the boardroom only days earlier. She was dressed casually in a light sweater and dark jeans, looking far less like the commanding chief executive officer everyone knew and far more like someone carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Daniel greeted her politely. "Good afternoon." Victoria offered a respectful smile. "I hope I am not interrupting your day." Daniel stepped aside. "You are welcome to come in." The house was warm with the comforting aroma of fresh chocolate chip cookies that Emma had insisted on baking that morning. Family photographs covered the hallway walls, each one capturing ordinary moments that quietly reflected years of love, patience, and perseverance. Victoria noticed there were no expensive decorations, no signs of luxury, only a home that felt genuinely lived in. Emma appeared from the kitchen carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. Daniel introduced them, and Emma greeted Victoria with the same kindness her father showed everyone. After a few minutes, Emma excused herself to finish reading for school, leaving the 2 adults seated across from one another at the small dining table. For a moment, neither person spoke. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "I came here because I owe you something that should have happened before you walked out of that conference room." Daniel listened quietly without interrupting. "I judged your value by reports, deadlines, and numbers," she continued. "I believed leadership meant pushing harder and demanding more. Over the past several days, I have learned that many of the things holding our company together were never written into any report. They were carried by you." Daniel folded his hands together thoughtfully. "Companies often measure what is easy to count," he replied gently. "The harder things to measure are usually the ones that matter most." Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking again. "I should have listened before I gave orders. I should have asked questions before making assumptions. And I should have recognized your contributions long before your desk became empty." Daniel remained silent long enough for the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock to fill the room. There was no satisfaction on his face, no desire to see her uncomfortable, only patience. Finally, he smiled softly. "We all make decisions with the understanding we have at the time." Victoria looked at him with surprise. "You are not angry." Daniel shook his head. "Anger rarely builds anything worth keeping. Emma is watching how I respond to difficult moments every day. If I allow bitterness to become my teacher, then eventually it becomes hers as well. That is not the lesson I want to leave my daughter." Those simple words settled deeply between them. Victoria realized she had prepared herself for criticism, disappointment, perhaps even rejection. Instead, she found grace offered without conditions. She glanced toward the family photographs once more before quietly asking, "Would you ever consider coming back?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked through the kitchen window where Emma was helping an elderly neighbor gather fallen branches from the front yard without being asked. A proud smile crossed his face. "If I ever return," he said at last, "it cannot be to the same culture that made people believe fear creates excellence. People do their best work when they know they are respected, not when they are afraid of losing everything." Victoria nodded slowly. "Then perhaps the company has more to change than I realized." As she stood to leave, Daniel walked her to the front door. Before stepping outside, she paused and turned back. "Thank you for receiving me with kindness after everything that happened." Daniel smiled with the same quiet confidence that had never depended on a job title. Every person deserves the chance to become better than they were yesterday. Victoria drove away in thoughtful silence, understanding that the greatest lesson she had learned all week had not come from a boardroom, a financial report, or a leadership seminar. It had come from the small dining table of a single father whose character had remained steady long after his career had changed. Monday morning arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation that neither Daniel Brooks nor Victoria Hayes could fully explain. At Sterling Dynamics, employees noticed something different before the first meeting even began. Victoria was already in the lobby, greeting people by name instead of walking directly to the executive elevator. She asked about their families, listened instead of rushing every conversation, and thanked the maintenance team for preparing the building before sunrise. The changes were subtle, almost easy to overlook, but they spread through the office like the first warm light after a long season of gray skies. Later that morning, Victoria gathered the leadership team in the same conference room where everything had changed only a week before. The polished table, the large presentation screens, and the familiar city skyline beyond the windows remained exactly as they had been, but the atmosphere felt entirely different. She stood before the group without opening a presentation or displaying financial charts. Today, she began calmly, we are not discussing quarterly numbers first. We are discussing the people who make those numbers possible. Several managers exchanged surprised glances. Victoria continued with steady confidence. I believe leadership meant having the right answers. I have learned that leadership begins by asking better questions and listening with respect. No one interrupted. She announced a series of immediate changes, including open discussions between departments, mentorship opportunities for new employees, flexible scheduling for parents with young children, and regular meetings where every employee could safely share ideas without fear of embarrassment or dismissal. Some executives looked uncertain, while others quietly smiled, recognizing that the company had needed this change for years. Meanwhile, Daniel spent the morning volunteering at Emma's middle school career day after one of her teachers invited parents to speak about problem solving and responsibility. Daniel did not describe himself by his previous job title. Instead, he told students that the most valuable skill any person could develop was earning trust one small decision at a time. He explained that people remembered how they were treated long after they forgot presentations, awards, or impressive titles. The students listened closely because his words carried the quiet confidence of someone who had lived every lesson he shared. When the event ended, several parents thanked him for encouraging their children with such simple honesty. Daniel accepted every compliment with humility before helping fold chairs and carry supplies back into the school library. That afternoon, Victoria arrived at the school unexpectedly. She had called ahead to ask permission from the principal because she hoped to speak with Daniel once his volunteer work had finished. She found him stacking boxes of educational materials beside the auditorium stage while Emma laughed with friends nearby. I hope I am not interrupting, Victoria said. Daniel smiled politely. Not at all. She handed him a sealed envelope, but did not ask him to open it immediately. Inside is a formal invitation from our board of directors, she explained. It is not simply an offer to return. It is an opportunity to help reshape the way our company leads people. Daniel looked at the envelope without reaching for it. What has changed? He asked gently. Victoria answered without hesitation. We have started changing because of what we learned after you left. But lasting change requires more than new policies. It requires someone who already lives the values we hope to build. Daniel remained thoughtful for several quiet moments. Emma walked over carrying her science project ribbon, smiling proudly as she joined her father. Victoria congratulated her warmly, and Emma thanked her with the same kindness she showed everyone. Watching father and daughter together, Victoria understood once again that Daniel's greatest achievement had never been found inside an office building. It had always been the life he built every evening after leaving work. Daniel finally accepted the envelope, but smiled gently before speaking. I will read it carefully. If I return, it will not be because I miss my old position. It will be because I believe people deserve a workplace where respect is practiced every day, not just written into a handbook. Victoria nodded with genuine gratitude. As she walked back toward her car, she realized that real transformation never begins with authority. It begins when someone with quiet dignity inspires others to become better than they were the day before. 3 weeks passed quietly, and with each new sunrise, Sterling Dynamics felt a little less like the company it had once been. Employees noticed that conversations had become more respectful. Department meetings ended with practical solutions instead of frustration, and managers were beginning to spend more time listening than speaking. The transformation was still incomplete, but it was genuine. Victoria Hayes understood that changing policies was easy compared to changing habits, and every evening, she asked herself the same question before leaving the office. Did I lead people today, or did I simply manage them? The answer mattered more to her than any quarterly report. On a bright Wednesday morning, Daniel Brooks returned to the headquarters for the first time since the day he had quietly walked away. He entered through the front doors carrying the same worn leather messenger bag that had accompanied him for years. Several employees noticed him immediately. Instead of awkward silence, warm smiles spread across the lobby. The receptionist stood to greet him. A young analyst hurried over to shake his hand. The maintenance supervisor smiled broadly and thanked him for always treating every member of the staff with equal respect. Daniel greeted each person with the same humble kindness he had always shown, never behaving as though he had returned to prove anyone wrong. Victoria met him near the executive conference room, but this time she did not walk several steps ahead as she once had. Instead, they walked side by side. Inside the boardroom, every member of the leadership team was already waiting. Victoria stood before them and spoke with calm sincerity. Today is not about welcoming back an employee. Today is about welcoming a teacher. She turned toward Daniel. Our company has spent years investing in technology, strategies, and growth. We forgot to invest enough in character. That changes today. Daniel thanked her quietly before placing the invitation letter on the conference table. I have read every word, he said. I accept the opportunity with one condition. Every person in the room listened carefully. My schedule will allow me to continue taking my daughter to school every morning and being home for dinner every evening. Those hours are not negotiable because success at work means very little if I fail the people waiting for me at home. The room remained silent for only a moment before Victoria smiled. Those terms have already been approved. Several executives exchanged surprised looks, but none objected. Victoria continued, Your position will focus on leadership development, mentoring, and strengthening collaboration across every department. Your success will not be measured only by financial results. It will also be measured by the growth of the people around you. Daniel nodded appreciatively. Then I believe we are building something worth joining. Over the following days, his office remained unusually busy, not because employees brought him problems to solve, but because they came seeking advice. Daniel never began conversations by offering answers. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions that encouraged people to discover solutions together. Young employees left his office feeling more confident. Experienced managers found themselves reconsidering old habits. Even disagreements gradually became opportunities for cooperation rather than competition. One afternoon, Victoria walked past a meeting room where Daniel was mentoring several newly promoted supervisors. Through the glass wall, she watched him listen far more than he spoke. When someone finished sharing an idea, Daniel thanked them before asking another question that helped the entire group think more deeply. There were no dramatic speeches, no displays of authority, and no attempts to impress anyone. Yet every person in the room leaned forward with genuine attention. Victoria quietly smiled to herself because she finally understood something that had escaped her for years. Influence was never created by raising a voice. It was earned through consistency, humility, and respect repeated every single day. That evening, Daniel left the office precisely on time, just as he had promised. He arrived at Emma's school in time to watch her choir rehearsal before the two of them walked home beneath the golden colors of autumn. As Emma happily described her day, Daniel listened with complete attention, grateful that the career he had regained no longer required him to sacrifice the moments that mattered most. Behind him, Sterling Dynamics continued changing, not because one policy had been rewritten, but because one quiet example had finally been seen. 6 months passed, and the changes inside Sterling Dynamics became impossible to ignore. Employee turnover had dropped, customer satisfaction reached its highest level in years, and the atmosphere inside the building felt lighter than anyone could remember. New employees often assumed the company had always operated with such openness and mutual respect, never realizing that the transformation had begun with one quiet decision made in a conference room on a rainy morning. Daniel Brooks never spoke about that day unless someone asked him directly. Even then, he never described it as a victory. He simply smiled and said that every difficult moment offers people the opportunity to choose who they will become. His office remained one of the busiest places in the building, yet the door was almost always open. Employees from every department stopped by for advice, encouragement, or simply a few minutes of honest conversation. Daniel listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and reminded people that the strongest teams were built on trust instead of fear. Across the hall, Victoria Hayes had become a different leader as well. She still made difficult decisions, but now she began every executive meeting with a simple question: how will this affect our people? At first, the leadership team found the question unusual. Eventually, it became the standard by which every important decision was measured. Profits continued growing, but for the first time they understood that healthy numbers were the result of healthy relationships rather than the other way around. One Friday afternoon, the company gathered in the main atrium to celebrate the completion of a community scholarship program that Sterling Dynamics had launched for local students interested in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Instead of inviting outside speakers, Victoria asked Emma Brooks to demonstrate the science project that had won first place at her school. Standing confidently before hundreds of employees, Emma explained her design with the same quiet confidence her father had encouraged since childhood. When she finished, the room filled with warm applause. Daniel stood near the back, smiling with pride, but making no effort to step into the spotlight. Victoria noticed him watching his daughter instead of the audience. She walked over and stood beside him. "You were right," she said softly. Daniel looked at her with quiet curiosity. "About what?" She smiled. "Real success begins at home. Everything else grows from there." Daniel nodded gently. People who feel valued carry that feeling everywhere they go. As the celebration ended, employees slowly returned to their offices while families gathered outside beneath the bright afternoon sun. Emma ran ahead toward the parking lot, laughing as autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk. Daniel followed at an easy pace, while Victoria walked beside them for a few moments before stopping near the entrance. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Daniel looked at her with the same calm expression he had carried through every season of change. "For what?" Victoria glanced back at the busy building where people were holding doors for one another, greeting coworkers by name, and smiling without hesitation. "For reminding all of us that dignity does not need to announce itself. It simply changes every room it enters." Daniel smiled warmly. Every person deserves respect before they earn recognition. Recognition may come later. Respect should come first. Emma reached back and took her father's hand as they continued toward their car. Victoria remained standing near the entrance, watching them disappear into the gentle glow of the late afternoon. She realized that the most unforgettable moment of her career had not been signing a major contract or leading a successful company. It had been watching a single father quietly pick up a photograph of his daughter, protect his dignity without anger, and walk away with nothing except his character. In the end, he had not changed the company by proving someone wrong. He had changed it by showing everyone what quiet integrity looked like when it refused to compromise. And long after quarterly reports were forgotten and executive titles were replaced by new names, the lesson remained beautifully simple. The greatest leaders are not remembered because they demanded respect. They are remembered because they gave it freely, even when it cost them something, trusting that grace, dignity, and second chances would always leave a deeper legacy than fear ever could.